Billionaires don't have salaries. CEOs take $1 paychecks. The wealthiest people on earth legally pay less tax than you do. Not because they're cheating, because they're playing a different game entirely, one you've never been taught. Welcome back to Path to Profit, where history meets money. Here's what they told you. Work hard, save money, climb the ladder, get a good job, max out your 401k, retire at 65. That's the plan for the 99%. But the 1%? They don't follow that plan. They don't work for paychecks. They don't save in bank accounts. And they definitely don't retire. Because they learned something the rest of us never did. Income is taxed. But wealth is protected. Let me show you exactly how they do it. Let's start with the most important. Will the rich understand? Never take a salary if you can avoid it. In 2023, Elon Musk's official salary from Tesla was $0. Jeff Bezos paid himself $81,000 a year as Amazon's CEO, Mark Zuckerberg. $1. You might think that's humble. It's not. It's strategy. Because in the United States, income is taxed at the highest rates. If you earn a salary, you pay income tax up to 37% at the federal level. Add state taxes, and you're losing nearly half. But the rich don't earn income. They own assets. And assets are taxed completely differently. When you own stock in a company, it can increase in value. A lot. But as long as you don't sell it, you don't pay taxes on that gain. It's called unrealized appreciation. So instead of taking a salary that gets taxed immediately, billionaires take stock. The stock grows. Their net worth explodes. And they pay. Nothing, not until they sell. And even then, they have tricks to avoid that too. This is why Jeff Bezos can be worth over $100 billion. But his taxable income some years is shockingly low. He's not earning money. He's accumulating wealth. And wealth doesn't get taxed the same way. But here's the next question. If they're not taking salaries, how do they actually spend money? They borrow it. This is the part most people don't understand. The ultra-wealthy don't sell their assets to buy things. They use them as collateral. It's called a securities-backed line of credit. You take your stock portfolio worth, let's say, $50 million, and you go to a private bank. The bank lends you 10 or 20 million against that portfolio. At a very low interest rate, sometimes under 2%, now you have cash to spend. You buy houses, yachts, private jets, whatever you want. But here's the magic. That loan isn't income. So it's not taxed. You're living like a billionaire, spending millions, and paying zero income tax. Because technically, you didn't earn anything. You borrowed it. And because your assets keep growing faster than the interest on the loan, you come out ahead. You never have to sell. You never trigger a taxable event. You just borrow against your wealth forever. This is how the rich live. They don't cash out. They leverage. Meanwhile, the middle class is told to pay off debt as fast as possible. Debt is bad, they say. Avoid loans. Live within your means. That advice works if you're poor. It's terrible advice if you're trying to get rich. Because the wealthy understand something most people don't. Debt is a tool. And when used correctly, it's one of the most powerful wealth-building strategies in existence. Let me give you a historical example. In the 1800s, Cornelius Vanderbilt became one of the richest men in America. Not by saving. By borrowing. He borrowed to build railroads. He borrowed to buy ships. He leveraged every dollar he had, and then borrowed more. When his investments paid off, the returns were massive. And the interest he paid on the debt, tax deductible. The same strategy works today. Real estate investors do this constantly. They buy properties with mortgages. Rent covers the loan. The property appreciates. And they use the equity to buy more properties. They're not using their own money. They're using the banks. They're building empires on leverage. But the 1% don't stop there. Because even when they do sell assets, they have ways to avoid taxes. It's called tax loss harvesting. Here's how it works. Let's say you own 2 stocks. One goes up. One goes down. If you sell the winning stock, you owe capital gains tax on the profit. But if you also sell the losing stock, you can use that loss to offset the gain. Legally, The IRS allows it. So the rich are constantly selling assets at a loss. On paper, to cancel out their gains, they're not actually losing money. They're just moving it around in ways that minimize taxes. And when they do pay capital gains tax, it's capped at 20%, far lower than income tax rates. So a teacher earning $60,000 a year might pay a higher tax rate than a billionaire selling $100 million in stock. That's not a loophole. That's the design. Then there are trusts, foundations, family offices, offshore accounts. These aren't just for hiding money. They're legal structures that protect wealth across generations. When Andrew Carnegie sold his steel empire in 1901, he became the richest man in the world. But instead of keeping that money as personal income, he funneled it into a foundation. The Carnegie Foundation still exists today. It funds libraries, education, research. And because it's a charity, it pays no taxes. Did Carnegie lose that wealth? No. He controlled how it was spent. His name is on buildings across the country. His legacy is immortalized. And his heirs benefit from the foundation's influence and resources. This is what the Rockefellers did. The Fords, the Getteses. Wealth doesn't disappear. It just moves into structures that are tax-exempt and legally protected. For the ultra-rich, a foundation isn't charity. It's a dynasty. But let's talk about the most powerful strategy of all, the step-up and basis loophole. This is the one that lets billionaires pass wealth to their children, completely tax-free. Here's how it works. Let's say you bought stock for $1. Over your lifetime, it grows to $1 million. If you sold it, you'd owe capital gains tax on $999,000 in profit. But if you don't sell and you die, your heirs inherit that stock at its current value, $1 million. That becomes their new cost basis. If they sell it the next day for $1 million, they owe zero taxes. The entire gain, everything that happened during your life, is erased. This is how generational wealth is preserved. Rockefeller's grandchildren didn't inherit income. They inherited assets that had already grown, and those assets were never taxed. The step up in basis. Rule has transferred trillions of dollars across generations without a single tax bill, and it's completely legal. Meanwhile, working families inherit debt, medical bills, funeral costs. The middle class passes down obligations. The rich pass down empires. Now let's connect this to history, because none of this is new. In ancient Rome, the wealthy didn't work either. They owned land. Land generated rent. Rent was passive income, and the aristocracy lived off that income for centuries. The Roman Senate wasn't filled with workers. It was filled with landowners, people who controlled resources and collected wealth without lifting a finger. When the empire collapsed, it wasn't because of barbarians. It was because wealth had concentrated so much at the top that the system couldn't sustain itself. The same pattern repeated in feudal Europe. Lords owned the land. Peasants worked it. The wealth flowed up, and it stayed there. The Industrial Revolution changed the game for a brief moment. Suddenly, new fortunes could be built through factories and innovation. People like Carnegie and Rockefeller rose from nothing, but even they understood the lesson. Once you have wealth, you stop working for money. You make money work for you. By the early 1900s, Carnegie had retired. Rockefeller spent his later years giving away his fortune strategically through foundations that carried his name and values. They weren't working. They were allocating, controlling, shaping. Fast forward to today. The game hasn't changed. It's just faster. Tech billionaires don't take salaries. They take stock options. Those options vest over time. The stock price explodes. And suddenly, they're worth billions. Without earning a single paycheck, hedge fund managers use something called carried interest. It's a tax structure that lets them pay capital gains rates on income that should be taxed as salary. They're literally redefining what counts as income. Private equity firms buy companies using borrowed money. They strip out cash, pay themselves dividends, and if the company fails, they walk away. The debt stays with the company. They keep the profits. This isn't wealth creation. It's wealth extraction, but it's legal, and it's how fortunes are made today. So here's the uncomfortable truth. The system has two rule books. One for people who work. One for people who own. If you work, you're taxed on everything. Income, purchases, property. Every transaction is visible. Every dollar is tracked. If you own, you're taxed on almost nothing. Unrealized gains? Untaxed borrowed money? Untaxed. Inheritance? Barely taxed? The middle class is told to work harder, save more, be responsible. Meanwhile, the wealthy are learning to leverage, defer, and structure, and the gap keeps growing. Not because the rich are smarter, but because they're playing by a completely different set of rules. The 1% don't work for money. They don't need to. Money works for them. Through assets. Through leverage. Through structures designed to protect and multiply wealth. And unless you understand how those structures work, you'll spend your whole life wondering why working harder doesn't make you richer. Because working harder was never the path to wealth. Ownership was. And ownership has always been reserved for those who already have it. If this gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe. History has the answers, and on Path to Profit, we'll show you where to look.